Okay, let's just dive right into this, shall we? We are tackling the ultimate frustration today. You know the feeling. Spending hours, literally hours, studying a complex topic, feeling like you've completely mastered the whole shebang, only to walk into a crucial interview or a big meeting a couple of weeks later and just draw a complete blank. If you've ever experienced that absolute dread of information just evaporating from your mind, you're going to want to pay really close attention to this explainer.
For the longest time, a lot of us just assumed, well, maybe we simply aren't the kind of people who naturally retain things, right? We blame our brains. But listen, as a senior applied scientist at Amazon who came from a totally non-tech background and having mentored over 200 people into AI and machine learning roles, I can promise you this: it is absolutely not your brain's fault. I've watched genuinely brilliant people put in countless hours only to freeze up when it actually matters. The real culprit? It's your method. Most of us were just, frankly, never taught the cognitive science behind how true learning actually works.
Which brings us to Section 1, the illusion of learning.
So, here's the thing. The absolute most common study tactic out there, rereading your notes, scanning the documentation again, meticulously highlighting text, is actually a massive trap. It triggers this incredibly common, well-documented phenomenon known as the fluency illusion. Think about it. When you read a highlighted passage for the third time, the material feels super familiar. Your brain recognizes the words and sends this little signal saying, "Oh yeah, I know this, I've got this." But here's the kicker. You aren't actually learning. You are literally just pattern matching, and that gives you a completely false sense of productivity and mastery.
The core issue here really boils down to recognition versus retrieval. These are entirely different cognitive processes. Recognition is totally passive. It's exactly what happens when you look at an open textbook. But retrieval, that's the act of pulling information from your memory completely from scratch. And that is the active cognitive process that actually matters. Because when you're on the job or sweating it out in a technical interview, you don't get points for recognizing the right answer, you have to retrieve it.
Moving on to Section 2, recall and pre-testing.
Now, to fix this fluency illusion, you have to completely change your environment. I'm talking closing all your documentation, shutting the tutorial, hiding your notes, and practicing active recall. The data on this is wild. Research shows that actively retrieving information actually physically strengthens your neural pathways. Students who test themselves achieve a staggering 80% retention rate after 1 week. Compare that to a really dismal 34% for those who just reread the material. The very difficulty of pulling that answer from your brain, that friction is exactly what makes the memory stick.
But active recall isn't just for after you've studied. Actually, even more surprisingly, a 2025 study in memory and cognition confirms the insane power of pre-testing. This means quizzing yourself on a topic before you've even opened the book. Imagine trying to explain a complex concept, like, say, gradient descent, before you've even watched the lecture. You will fail. And honestly, that is exactly the point. Failing primes your brain by creating this mental gap that it desperately wants to fill when you actually do sit down to study the material.
Okay, Section 3, the forgetting curve.
Even if you use active recall and pre-testing perfectly, you are still facing a really harsh reality. And that reality is 80%. Discovered by Ebbinghaus way back in the 1800s, this is the devastating amount of new information you lose within just 48 hours if you don't review it. To put that into perspective, it doesn't matter how amazing or intense your initial study session was, one single exposure simply does not create a durable memory. Without a strategic review system in place to maintain those fresh neural pathways, the knowledge literally just leaks right out of your head.
So what's the solution? The solution to the forgetting curve is spaced repetition. By reviewing your active recall sessions at these expanding intervals, like day 1, then day 3, then 1 week, and then 2 weeks out, you literally push that forgetting curve further and further out. The intervals get longer simply because the memory is getting stronger. And get this, a meta-analysis shows that combining spaced repetition with active recall improves your outcomes by another 25% compared to using either strategy alone. They don't just add up, they compound like interest.
Now, utilizing spaced repetition means you're going to be doing shorter, much more frequent study sessions. You won't always just be at your desk at home. You'll be out in cafes, at airports, or sitting in waiting rooms, hopping on public Wi-Fi. And that's exactly why securing your sessions with Surfshark VPN is such an essential tool for this method. It encrypts your public Wi-Fi traffic, keeping your crucial credentials for GitHub or your course platforms totally safe from interception. Plus, their web content blocker strips out all those distracting ads, which is a total game changer for helping you maintain that deep focus entirely on retrieving information.
Let's jump to Section 4, interleaving versus block studying.
We actually have another massive fluency illusion to avoid here. Most people study one single topic in a massive block, right? Spending weeks on one specific concept before finally moving on to the next. It feels really organized, but it is deeply, deeply flawed. Instead, you should be mixing your topics up in what's called interleave study. And the delayed test scores on this are just staggering. The interleave study group scored 63%, while the block study group scored a mere 20%. Mixing topics might feel a bit messy and kind of less productive in the moment, but it literally triples your actual retention. Why? Because it forces your brain to constantly identify which concept applies to which problem, which is exactly what you'd have to do in the real world.
Finally, Section 5, the walk and talk. I love this one. This is arguably the absolute most effective technique for making incredibly difficult technical concepts stick permanently in your brain. It's based on this fascinating concept called dual coding and embodied cognition. When you get up and actually walk around while explaining a concept out loud to yourself, you engage multiple physical systems all at once. Your motor cortex is active from walking, your speech centers are working overtime to produce language, and you are getting auditory feedback simply by hearing yourself speak. So instead of passively reading through a single channel, you are encoding the memory deeply across 3 entirely separate channels.
This is essentially the Feynman technique in its absolute purest form. Explaining a topic out loud to an empty room instantly strips away that fluency illusion we talked about earlier. You'll be talking along, feeling super confident, and then, bam! You suddenly stumble because you realize you can't actually articulate the very next step. It immediately exposes your knowledge gaps, forcing you to go back and truly, genuinely understand the mechanics of what you are studying.
But, here's the catch with everything we've talked about today. This uncomfortable, high-friction system only works if you do it consistently. And consistency is really, really hard when you're going at it alone. That is exactly why joining a structured community like the AI/ML Career Launchpad is so vital. It provides the exact structure and the peer accountability you need to stick with these methods when the studying inevitably gets tough.
Ultimately, this whole explainer really boils down to one fundamental shift in mindset. Everything that feels effortlessly productive, like rereading beautifully formatted notes and highlighting text, is a trap. True learning is uncomfortable by design. That friction you feel when you are desperately trying to retrieve a fact from your memory, that is the literal feeling of your brain growing and your neural pathways solidifying. Discomfort is the learning.
So I'll leave you with this question to ponder today. Are you ready to ditch the illusion of productivity and start getting uncomfortable? Seriously, think about how you are going to change your very next study session. Because as we've seen today, true durable learning does not happen when you are just staring passively at the page. It begins the exact moment you close the book.